Hi everybody, welcome back to ML's Plans. I'm really excited to be here today because we are going to be talking about books. I love reading. I really have been reading a lot more since the pandemic. That first summer when COVID was really just kind of getting started, I spent a lot of time reading, right? We weren't really leaving the house. So that's how I got back into reading after a really long time of not doing much of it. So one of my friends recommended that I share some of my favorite witch books with all of you. And what I decided to do is talk about some of my favorite fantasy books, just to kind of broaden the category a little bit. I am excited to share with you some of my favorites and some of my recent reads. And I am looking forward to hearing what you like to read in the comments. All right, so we're gonna get into it. I have my notes over here. I came up with a very short rating system. Number one is the world interesting. You know, what's the setting? How does the magic work? What's the environment that we're using the magic in? Number two, what's the ratio of drama to action? I love some drama, but if I'm gonna be reading a fantasy book, I wanna see some action where the powers and the magic is being utilized. Number three, what's the spiciness of the book? A lot of the books I read have a heavy romance element into it. So how spicy of the romance is that? Am I interested in the relationships among the characters or not? And then number four, overall, what do I think of this book? So that's kind of my very short rating system. And we are gonna get started. So if you are on any sort of book Instagram or TikTok account, you have probably heard of the Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. It's a series of fairies, so not witches, but they have powers and it's a very interesting world. So number one, is the world interesting? 5 out of 5, yes. All of the different lands that the fairies live within have very distinct elements, and the mortal land also has a really interesting tie-in with the relationship with the fairy land. So I think that is super unique and interesting. Drama to action, 5 out of 5. There is heavy drama in this series, but there's also a lot of action where you're getting to see the different characters utilize their powers and fight with it. So it's really interesting. Spiciness, 5 out of 5. There's a lot of heavy romance scenes in these books. I feel very connected and rooting for certain characters and their relationships. And it's not primarily focused on just one relationship. There's some additional ones throughout the series that you can kind of get sucked into. Overall, this series is amazing. It was recommended to me by some friends last year and I read it last summer and I was just obsessed. If you're interested in getting sucked into a series, A Court of Thorns and Roses is your places to be. 5 out of 5, check it out, you won't regret it. All right, so next on my list is Shadow and Bone series by Leigh Bardugo. And this series follows one main character who discovers she has some powers, and she utilizes them in a very interesting way. I won't give any spoilers, but the world, the setting of this book is inspired by some Russian history and folklore, which I thought was really interesting. I hadn't read, I don't think, any books in the past that had that type of setting or influence within them. So I would say 4 out of 5, a very interesting world. The drama to action ratio in this series, I would say, is also 4 out of 5. There's a decent amount of the main character learning how to utilize her powers, so I would say that's kind of like a lull in the action. But overall, she's getting, the main character is Alina, she's getting to use her powers and is discovering some friends along the way who also have unique abilities. So I would say drama to action, 4 out of 5. Spiciness level, I would say 3 out of 5. There's nothing too spicy in the book, but there's some romantic elements, some smooching in there. And overall, I think the characters are very interesting in the romantic relationships. There's a little bit of a love triangle in the first novel. overall, I love Shadow and Bone. You want to kind of get sucked into something, you could really dive deep into the setting and the world of this. There's Shadow and Bone, and then there's another series that Leigh Bardugo wrote called Crooked Kingdom that follows another set of characters in the same world. And then there's another one called King of Scars that I wouldn't recommend reading that until you read Shadow and Bone series first, just because it's the setting and story takes place after Shadow and Bone ends. But those are also really great books to read. You really get a deep dive into the world that Leigh Bardugo created, which I think is really the highlight of the series. I definitely recommend you read this one. It is also on Netflix, and I think the Netflix series did a really good job of sticking to the books. There's a few changes here and there with introducing the Crooked Kingdom characters into the storyline. But overall, I think it is a great series, and Leigh Bardugo played a really big role in creating the series and being a part of it. So if you want a read and then watch opportunity, I think Shadow and Bone would be a really good series to check out. So the next series I wanted to talk about is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Maharan. And this is a series of books following a young witch named Lou. The world, I think, is pretty interesting. I give it a 3 out of 5. It's set in like historical France. And throughout the novel, there's like little bits of French throughout it, which I think is really interesting and kind of puts you into the world that Maharan created. So I would give it a 3 out of 5 on that. For the drama to action ratio, I would also give it a 3 out of 5. The first book is, I would say, very focused on like the relationship piece and the romance aspect of the two main characters kind of figuring out their relationship. But there's some pretty good drama in it. Blood and Honey, which is the second book, I would say has a little bit more action, a little bit more use of the magic and adventure element, which I like. Spiciness, I give it a 2 out of 5. I would say being a spicy novel isn't really the goal of the series. I think it's more on the relationship piece of it, like friendship wise and just like a steady relationship, not necessarily like the most steamy relationships out there. Overall, I'm still reading the third book of the series. I've slowed down a little bit on the third. I would say it's getting a little bit more heavy on the drama and a little less interesting on the action part. And it's a pretty thick book. I shared it in my intro video, like that big, thick Gods and Monsters book that I checked out from the library. In comparison to Shadow and Bone and A Court of Thorns and Roses, I would recommend you read those ones first. But if you've already checked those out and you enjoyed them, I think Serpent and Dove would be a great next series to dive into. So next on my list is the X Hex by Erin Sterling. This is a series. The second book hasn't come out just yet. I think it's coming out in a few months. But I would say this is a romance novel about witches. The world, I would give it a 2 out of 5. It's like a small town. It gives me like Halloween town vibes. So it might be an interesting book to read as we get closer to fall. It might give you all the cozy feelings. In this book, the main character creates a hex that she doesn't quite realize the impact of what she did. So drama to action, I gave it like a 3 out of 5. I would say there's a good amount of like relationship drama to like action of trying to go on an adventure to resolve and fix everything that the main character had done. Spiciness, again, I think it's a romance book about witches, so it is spicy. I would say there's some nice romance scenes in there between some of the characters, so 3 out of 5 on that. Overall, I think this is just a really fun book to read if you're looking for something lighter, something that's going to make you laugh. I think Sterling does a really good job of that. So I would say it's a recommend from me. Right. And then we have Payback's A Witch by Lana Harper. This is also a series, but I've only read the first one so far. Interesting world, I give it a 2 out of 5. It's kind of set in just another small town that makes me think of like Salem, Massachusetts, or a Halloween town. Drama to action, this one I think had a lot more personal drama than action, so 2 out of 5 on this. It centers around a like witch competition, where you get to see some of the like action of the characters utilizing their powers and going on these grand adventures. So I would say that is when you get most of the action in this book. But it's just a little bit more heavier on the like day-to-day relationships between the characters. The main character, Emmy, kind of deciding on what path she wants to take, and all of the emotions that come up for her when she's back in her hometown that she hasn't been to in a while. So I would have liked there to be more action in this book. Spiciness, 3 out of 5. I think there's some good romantic scenes in here. It is focused on like a couple main characters who all got their heart broken by the same person. And then there's, you know, a new relationship blooming among some of the characters, so I thought that was interesting. Overall, I wish this book had focused more on the main character, Emmy's like friendship, her one main best friend. I think it's just kind of used as like a side character. But it seems like there could have been like really good, wholesome moments between these two like long-term best friends who are, you know, figuring out their new lives, and I just think that was really missing and I wanted more of that. So I think this is an interesting book. I would recommend the X Hex before Payback's a Witch. I'm probably going to check out the next few books in the series when I get the time, because it focuses on some of the other characters that were introduced throughout the first novel, and I think that's an interesting way to continue the story, but using it from different characters' perspectives. Right. And the last book I wanted to talk about is These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. This book is also a series. I've only read the first one so far, and I got this from my friend. I follow one of my friends on Goodreads, and she had read it and gave it like, I think like 4 out of 5 stars, so I added it to my list, and I loved this book. It is kind of set in another similar, just like small town. 3 out of 5 on that. Nothing special about the world or anything like that. I think what gives it a 3 out of 5 instead of like a 2 out of 5 that I gave some of the other like similar small town settings is how the magic is utilized in this book. There's like different categories of witches, which I thought was really cool. There's like blood witches and elemental witches and casters, which are like the wands and such, potions and spells. So I thought it was really interesting that each of the witches had a unique system of how they use the magic. Drama to action in this book, 4 out of 5. There's like a good amount of personal, interpersonal drama, romantic drama, you know, familiar drama, but then there was like some good action in this book, where there's like scenes where you're not quite sure what's going to happen when you know, surprising events occur. They have repercussions, which I think in some of the other witch books I've read, they kind of resolve everything, and you know, there's this big dramatic situation, but everything's okay and everyone's fine. But in These Witches Don't Burn, there is like some consequences in the book. There's like repercussions, and I really enjoyed that. I don't want everything to just be like okay and all right. I want there to be action and drama, and I think this book really nailed it. Spiciness, 2 out of 5. I believe it's a young adult book, so they kind of do like the fade to black scenes, so you're not getting that, but I don't think you need it in this book. The relationships are so good. The drama to action ratio is good. You're not really missing anything on like the spiciness level by that lacking. Overall, I think this book is amazing. I recommend you read it for sure. I am going to be reading the next book soon, probably in my next like library haul, so I'm really looking forward to that. That's what I have for you today. Those are some of my recent fantasy / witch reads, and some of the books that I recommend you look into if you're interested in finding a new series. If you have any witch, fantasy, fairy, all of the above series to recommend to me, please put them in the comments. I'm always looking for new books to read, and I really get excited when it gets sucked into a series. If there's any books on here that you disagree with, please let me know. I'd be happy to have that conversation and to hear your perspective if you've read these books before. But overall, I really appreciate you hanging out with me here today. And I hope you have a good rest of your day wherever you are and that you take care. Bye.